All right, this is an interview for my intro to African American class at TSU with Dr. Kimberly Brown.
Okay.
And this is going to be uploaded to a YouTube page that she has. And so the point of having this interview is to have an opportunity to just overall what I like to do is gain some knowledge from people who have lived through life experiences that are particular to a time in history. And I know you as PK people around here in the Third Ward area are also told me about PK, and I always heard about PK before I even met PK. And I actually met you for the first time here, which is how I would like for you to start off speaking about yourself is tell me like where are we, and then you can tell me your name, your full name, and who you are.
Okay. Well, I'm Perri Katherine McCary, which is what the PK stands for. And this is the historic Project Row Houses that was built, well not built, the houses were restored as part of a way of acknowledging historical components of neighborhoods that are many times dismissed. The founder is Rick Lowe, but it was several well-known artists that have been students of Dr. John Biggers over at TSU, who is a historical figure for a lot of us in the art world, especially the African American art world. And this space is what we call an incubation. And my idea was to teach young people a curriculum that encourages critical thinking.
Right.
And the critical thinking part of it has a lot to do with how we're marketed to, how we tell our narratives. Communications is my specialty. I'm a writer, an author. I work with young people, I mentor them. I have since I was young because you always reached back was part of my heritage. So the long and the short of it is that this house started off as a way to teach high schoolers this marketing, public relations, and graphic design skill set. And in doing so, it grew into something else because the students started bringing their parents and their cousins and their fellow students to learn this class. And so what started off with 4 students ended up turning to more than 75 plus artists and entrepreneurs and people who are working on social justice comes through this space, and we call it our house.
Right.
Because it doesn't discriminate. The diversity of the space continues to grow and blossom because somebody will tell you about me, but they'll also tell you about what happens here. It's an open space.
Yeah, and it's actually, I met you for the first time here, and it was actually when we were starting to organize for different activists. We all got together here, activists like Biko, Ashton, Hannah Secunda. We had a meeting here that actually is what kind of put us in the right position at the right time before everything happened over the summer. So this place has great significance for me personally because it was like something that was very special. It's like where I met you for the first time and where we actually kind of started getting our heads together to do some real work here in Houston.
And more than that too, one of my primary beliefs has to do with what's generational. And that what you do today affects the next 7 generations. Right. And that's a heady thought that you're sitting here talking to me has some implications on what happens 7 generations from now.
Right.
And as a person who, as Pastor Rudy says, I've lived longer than I have to live. I mean, I guess I could live to be 124. I hope not. I think death has its place. But at the same time, I've been here a while, and those experiences of my life could be beneficial to you, including what I did wrong, not just all the things that I've done right. And so this space is really committed to generational and intercultural work.
Awesome. So it's like we're in like the right space to have this conversation regarding Texas specifically during the civil rights movement, which, you know, a lot of people think about it as just the 60s, but doesn't understand also sometimes that it was really the build-up from the 50s, you know, Emmett Till and the Montgomery bus boycott, and then in the 60s was kind of like the flurry of everything that was kind of like coming together. So what are your memories about that time that you personally experienced or saw on the available media?
Well, as a communications person, I think one of the things about the 60s was really the beginning of how technology was getting the message out. That it wasn't just newspapers. Black African American newspapers flourished around this time. And people were controlling the narratives more, but things that were happening, like in Montgomery, or things that were happening in Selma, were being put on television, and people couldn't turn a blind eye anymore and say that these things didn't happen. I was also a teenager in the 60s, having been born in the 50s, and my father was an educator, my mother was a nurse. We lived in a community that had doctors and lawyers and sports figures. Cesar Cedeno lived right around the corner for me. I babysat for him. Jim Wynn.
What town was that?
It was like 67, 68.
And what city or?
Houston.
Right.
And we were taught that we needed an education, and that was part of what was going to make things equal for us around that time. But there was the birth of Barbara Jordan's career, and Thurgood Marshall, and you know there were people who were our heroes. I was listening to something that was talking about, you know, Jackie Robinson's versus Willie Mays, and knowing that people could get respect because they worked hard, they bought a house, they lived in neighborhoods, they grew. It was also a time when a lot of flights were going on. People didn't want to live in their communities, they wanted to go out to the suburbs. And if they didn't go out to the suburbs, whites were going further out into the suburbs. Right. So there was a huge division, but there was a sense of pride, you know. James Brown, I'm black and I'm proud, you know. The 60s and the 70s heralded we were important, and it was important to know that we were important, and teachers cared about kids. I mean, but there was prejudice and there was racism. And even then was the building of kind of the setup for mass incarceration and the things that we're dealing with today. And the lessons that we can learn from that is that we don't have to have another 40 years.
Right.
That's the lesson. These 40 years were built on the backs of slavery and Jim Crow, on that supposed horrible time of history. And we had 40 years where we bought into some things that we're having to reevaluate now. Our relationships across those cultural divides. Knowing that sometimes when I think about whether or not I'm going to go to work for somebody, I generally don't want a white male boss.
Right.
And why that is, because I'm ready for a change, but I'm getting old, not feeble, because I still have a brain that thinks, but I'm getting older, and I don't want you to have to deal with the disappointments that 20 years after I was 16 was so much hope. At 36, getting to be 40, I was frustrated that that glass ceiling wasn't very clear. It was cloudy. You knew that you were going to hit your head and that you weren't going to go further because the system was stacked against you. So.
And when it comes to here, particularly in Houston, Texas, I recently saw a article online from TSU itself, from commemorating, like honoring some action that some students did back in the 60s, some civics.
Holly Hogerbrook just died recently, and she was one of my mentors when I was growing up, because she was tall like me, because I'm 6 feet plus. And as a 14-year-old, having somebody that was as tall as I was always just a good thing. Plus she had the voice, and she was one of the students that desegregated wine gardens. And we did an event at TSU.
We did an event at TSU.
We did an event at TSU that talked about that period of time and how really organized they were. In fact, I have that on tape, and we need to get that out more. But the point is that that was a period where somebody cared enough about me to support me as a young black woman.
All right. And did you ever participate in anything? I know you were still young and under mentorship, but were you ever able to participate in something during that time?
I worked in Barbara Jordan's office one week out in Fifth Ward. I went to my first Democratic convention before I could vote. I got a chance to meet Dr. King when he came to Houston, and the black ministers of that time ran him out of Houston because they said we didn't need him. And then a year later to witness his death, witness the fact that he was murdered. And the students at Madison High School, which was then predominantly white, about 90% white, would not put the flag at half-mast. And so I went to the principal and asked him if he would do it. He told me that he would handle it, but he took the flag all the way down. And that was when I knew that the choice was mine, to think that I could work it out or I can demand it. And I think I've been a fighter ever since.
All right, and I think in order to wrap it up, I think I can at least say, and you can close with your thoughts, that it's a great time to see now how it's all coming back, and that the frustration you might have felt when you were entering your 40s can now, I guess, feel some type of solace to it, because now you start to see that maybe all the seeds that you planted yourself and grew are now starting to kind of like grow into something that right now you can actually see and feel.
You have not spoken truer words. I actually have a lot more hope than I did at 40, because I was afraid, because my kids were teenagers. I found myself having to talk with my 2 sons about how to handle it if they get stopped by the police. I taught them about justice, but I've got a grandson now, and the world's going to be much better because I am so invigorated by you and Brandy and Seconda and Jenna. I mean, I have this people currency of young people that all I have to do is give them a space sometimes, and you all take that idea and you just run with it. And you're doing critical thinking in mass. Plus you have technology that you're using better than anything before. So believe me, when it's my time to leave, I will die a happy woman, because I've given you the opportunity and you're taking it and you're running with it.
Well, thank you so much. And with that, I got to end it with a hug and signing off. Appreciate it so much.
All right.
And I know Dr. Brown's going to love this interview.
Yeah, need to do more of these and get more of these out.
Yes, ma'am.